All right.
Okay.
Let's go.
Today we are going to talk about documentary and propaganda, which will be your second paper. First paper you turn in is the one we did on popular history before mass media. Today we're going to talk about documentary and propaganda. So the first question I have for you is, which is the good one and which is the bad one? Yes, sir. Yes.
I think a good one is, like during World War II when America was like forming all these, propaganda kind of videos about being like courageous and everything against like Nazi Germany, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying there could be good propaganda?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. Does anyone else have an opinion on this?
I think they both could be.
Anybody else?
Yeah, that's based.
Well, aren't you the clever ones? Because traditionally, people have a positive association with documentary. Oh, it must be true. It's on PBS. It's educational. It's good for us. And they have a negative effect idea of propaganda. Oh, that's bad. That's trying to, make you do something bad. This is the evil government's trying to convince you of something. When in fact, you can have good and bad in both things. The main difference is, I wish I had two different colors of markers. I'll try that next time. This one is documenting something, and this one is propagate. This suggests that it's more inert. It's just saying, oh, this is what happened. And this is trying to spread something. But they're really just different terms for the same sort of thing. So for our purposes, I prefer the term nonfiction film, which means just like fiction is a novel and nonfiction covers everything else, like political books are nonfiction, but so is the dictionary. So fiction is a pretty narrow term, but nonfiction is everything that's not a made-up story. So I like the term nonfiction because all through, film history, they've been calling these things documentaries, which have been the traditional PBS educational, television sort of stuff. But now there's a huge range of nonfiction things in theaters that are called documentaries, but they're not really documentaries in the term that we think of them. And there are a whole wide range of things. There is no such thing as documentary. Have any of you heard the term cinema verite in your reading? It's French. It means, like filming real things.
They love the French.
So the idea of cinema verite came up in the 60s, and the idea was that you just put your camera there and record whatever happened. And you're not editing, you're not putting together a story, you're not interfering in any way, you're just going to record what goes on. Can any of you think of any examples that you might have seen in your own life of situations where there's just cameras put up everywhere to record what happens? Security cameras would be a good example. Anybody else?
Parents recording children doing their first things for their lives.
Anything you might have seen on television. Cameras everywhere.
So
Just
keeping up with
the Kardashians and everything that came before that. Does anyone believe that the Kardashians is a true, unedited documentary
I do.
of what really goes on?
I think they're true
Must not have
idiots.
watched any of it.
And in the same case, the security cameras would be an excellent example. However, someone still decided where to put the security camera. You face it at the entrances and the exits or where the cars go. You're still making a choice of what you want to record. And also the filming your kids taking steps for the first time. That is most definitely documenting this thing that happened, but it's also propaganda in that you value your child walking more than your child laying there, or everybody else walking. There's still someone making decisions, someone still making judgments. So it's not to say the documentary is a lie or untrue, but you always want to think, no matter what you're watching, especially if it purports to be nonfiction, what are they trying to tell you? And sometimes it's absolutely great propaganda like, this is your brain on drugs, don't take drugs. Then other times it could be, let's all be Nazis. So you need to have in your mind who is putting this forward. Yes, sir.
You said that there's no such thing as documentaries, or sort of something like that. I mean, I guess I can see what you're going for, but like, what if there's people that are trying to...
Yes, documentary is an absolutely viable genre. It's not like the word doesn't exist. It's not like documentary classes of films exist. What I'm saying is there's no such thing as a true cinema verite. I mean, even the spaceships that we have going out to Saturn are still programmed to look for something in particular. They still have a set focal length. They still have a set going. So there's no true, unbiased, and even if you do have a 360 camera that just records everything that goes on, it's got to stop sometime. There's always a human involved. There's always a decision involved. And so I'm not saying that documentary is not an absolute, viable genre, which I happen to love. I just want you to be aware that, even especially on the news when you see the phone cameras of, some incident that happened, you're not seeing the whole incident, and the person that recorded it was only standing in a certain place, and you don't see what happened before or after, or what they might not have seen, so there's no definitive, this is exactly what happened and it was all captured. Okay. Primary or secondary source. So, when can films be considered a primary source? Specifically, nonfiction film, but also nonfiction. Yes?
I feel like captured footage from that specific time period.
Can you give me any examples? Yes, which we will see in a minute. This very exciting film is one of the first films ever made, and it's of people walking out a door. So, has documented that, but not only has it documented that, but as a primary source of what people were wearing to work in a factory in 1895 in France. Anybody else primary source? Yes.
The recording of Kennedy being shot.
The Zapruder film, which is the only video film we have of the Kennedy assassination. Real short, it's the only one we have, but it's the only thing we can rely on. That is a primary source document that ballistics people and historians and legal people have all looked to. Any other first? Yes?
Why We Fight? What is the documentary
Mhm.
that was made? I think it was like British and U.S. propaganda. To kind of...
It was a documentary. It was also propaganda. And the whole film would not be considered a primary source because it is a created film put together. But there are lots of footage of ships and men and all these things that are a primary source of what it looked like at the time. Yes, Dr. Weiland?
Maybe some of the film, the footage that was shot at the liberation of Holocaust camps.
Exactly.
By soldiers.
Exactly. Any, say, news footage, any of that raw footage, that's primary source, but also interviews are primary documents. Even if that person is not telling the truth, it's still the same as a testimony or anything, or written letter or anything else that you would consider a primary source. So that's one thing I want you to keep in mind of when you're watching the documentaries. Is this someone who's speaking for themselves or evidence that you can clearly see? Or is this an interpreter saying, And I'm going to actually have you watch something in a couple of weeks. Have you ever watched, like, on the History Channel, things like Ancient Aliens or... Yeah. Well, I was watching one the other day, and I hope I can get it, because it's filled with phrases like, the ancients believe, and sources say, and it's said in this tone of voice that if you're not questioning, you're going to be like, oh, the ancients believe that. What ancients? How old? What civilization? So anytime someone is telling you something in voiceover, you know, think, do they really know that? Here, I've heard this one. Would anyone consider James Bond films to be a primary source?
No.
Maybe the early ones,
like
not the new ones. Maybe if they show actual footage of the places where they're shooting.
James Bond films are famous for having their storylines go all the way around the world. So in fact, James Bond films are wonderful records of what Rome looked like in 1960, of what Turkey looked like, the boat chase, under, the cistern, that sort of thing.
Byzantine cistern.
So you can find primary evidence of what things look like or what people said or, of what people look like, that sort of thing, in all sorts of sources. Okay, so defining terms in this category. Narrative versus non-narrative. Narrative is telling a story. Non-narrative is just showing you, like, security camera is non-narrative. Pretty much everything else you see is narrative if it's not just recording. So the first thing we're going to look at is non-narrative, and we're going to see if we can get this to work. Yes, no?
Yes.
Okay, so the Lumieres, you may remember on your quiz, the question of where did cinema develop? It developed in France. So the Lumiere brothers, when they first invented the motion picture camera, this is what they showed us. This is called Workers Leaving a Factory. And there's a sequel to this that is also other workers leaving another factory. There's a dog.
Big dog in front of the factory.
I thought it would have been workers going into the factory.
Oh, here comes, and people were reportedly, ooh, that's coming right towards us. So this is the first. Oh, and there's the sequel. Okay, we don't need to see that. Well, actually, in my other class where I had more time, I showed a lot more of this. Okay, here's people getting onto a boat. Do we have sound, honey? Can we get sound?
Wouldn't this be considered a silent film?
Well, it is a silent film, but there are other things that it has music behind it, and there's other things I'm going to show you that have sound, and I want to make sure I can get the sound. Okay, this one is called Feeding the Baby.
Feeding the baby. Feeding the baby.
Yes. As soon as they invented the camera, they started filming their kids doing cute things. Can you do it so they can hear? I mean, is there a... Oh, if it's just coming from this and it's not coming through anything, we don't have to do it. Can you guys hear anything?
It's like added on, right?
Yeah.
It's not like
Yeah, that's... Oh, see, now we're getting to the first... This is the very first narrative film.
it tells a story.
And so that's where we get into narrative. So you see the difference. The walking out was non-narrative. The eating the feeding the baby is non-narrative. It's just feeding the baby. But this is something that has a story. There we go.
How would it bring the kid?
Gambling.
Okay. All right. So that is the first narrative film with the water hose. So be aware that even when you're watching a documentary or propaganda, that it's someone, talking to you newsy, they're still telling you a story. They're still leading you along. So now we're going to show Nanook. This is the first narrative documentary film made by Robert Flaherty in the 1920s. Here is Nanook. He's in his canoe there.
Fast forward.
How? Oh, I thought there was a way to fast forward it without the ball, but I have to use the ball to fast forward it.
Well, you just do this.
Yeah. Believe that this was an international sensation. This was a hit film. Okay, you can stop it.
Stop it? Okay.
No, I think the whole film there was like 10 minutes or something.
Okay. So this is just one clip of Nanook, but it's a feature-length documentary of the Eskimo family living in the Arctic with canoes and the igloos, and
There's the whole movie.
so is Nanook a primary or a secondary source? Because
It's taken in time. It's captured in time.
because it is a recording of the way the Eskimos were living in 1920. And it became an international sensation. This is the first time people are seeing things from around the world, seeing this sort of documentation, and it's alive. Because Flaherty went up there to record the Eskimos and the ancient traditional way they lived, that they did not live anymore. They were in fact living in houses and it was still a rugged life.
Cable TV.
So he had them recreate this. This is all alive. They didn't really use those canoes, like their great-grandfathers had, but the whole of Nanook is staged. And this didn't come out till 40 years after the fact. So, you have this whole genre built on going around the world and filming the way the people really
Public
are.
relations.
Okay.
Do any of you have ethnic backgrounds? You ever participated in a sort of folk festival, put on the traditional clothes and did what ethnicity? Norwegian, so you have the Norwegian outfit and do the Norwegian folk dance? Yeah. It's not that that's inaccurate, in that those are the traditional costumes and those are the traditional dances. It's not a lie, but if someone filmed you and said, here's a Norwegian in Norway, doing the dances that she grew up with and her family does every Saturday night, probably not true. So, be aware that some things are just lies. Okay, so today people use narrative film to mean fiction, but even non-fiction films have narratives. Okay. So the term documentary came to mean something that is something historical or scientific is being documented. Like, in school you watch the educational films. These are documentaries. Okay, can you show me a little bit of Showa?
Mm-hmm.
It's been turnerized.
No.
It's color.
It's 11 years in the making. Countries. Nine hours of people being interviewed. Okay, can you stop it there?
Sure.